What if the person cleaning your home was hiding a story so powerful it could change your life forever? Steve Harvey had everything most people dream of: a mansion in Atlanta that looked like it came straight out of an architecture magazine, luxury cars parked in a garage bigger than most apartments, and a career that had taken him from sleeping in his car to becoming one of the most recognized faces on American television. Every morning he woke up in silk sheets, walked through marble hallways, and started his day with a fresh espresso prepared by his personal chef. But on that particular Tuesday morning in late September, something felt different. The air conditioning hummed softly through the vents, the Georgia sun filtered through floor-to-ceiling windows, and the house smelled of lemon cleaning products mixed with fresh flowers. Everything seemed normal, yet Steve couldn't shake an unusual feeling that had been growing in his chest for weeks. Maria Gonzalez had been working as his housekeeper for almost 3 years. She arrived every Tuesday and Friday at exactly 7 in the morning, always wearing the same faded blue uniform that looked 2 sizes too big for her small frame. She was a woman in her early 50s, with dark hair pulled back in a tight bun, deep brown eyes that rarely met anyone's gaze directly, and hands that showed years of hard labor. Steve had hired her through an agency that vetted domestic workers, and she had been nothing but professional, quiet, and incredibly thorough in her work. She never asked for anything extra, never complained, and barely spoke beyond polite greetings and confirmations about cleaning schedules. Most employers would consider that ideal, but lately Steve had started noticing things that didn't add up. It started small. One morning, he came downstairs earlier than usual and saw Maria standing in the kitchen, staring at a family photo on the refrigerator. She didn't notice him at first, and in that unguarded moment he saw something in her expression that made his heart clench. Profound sadness, mixed with something that looked like longing. When she finally sensed his presence and turned around, the mask of professional politeness snapped back into place so quickly it was almost frightening. She apologized for the intrusion, even though she had every right to be in that kitchen, and immediately went back to scrubbing the already spotless countertops with an intensity that seemed desperate. Steve had brushed it off that day, telling himself everyone had their private struggles, but the image of her face stayed with him. Then there were the phone calls. Maria kept her phone on silent, but Steve had noticed her checking it obsessively during her breaks, her face growing more anxious with each glance at the screen. Sometimes she would step outside to take calls, speaking in rapid Spanish that Steve couldn't understand, but the tone was unmistakable. Worry, fear, sometimes what sounded like pleading. Once he had walked past the laundry room and heard her crying softly while folding towels, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs she was clearly trying to suppress. When he knocked gently and asked if she was okay, she had wiped her face quickly, forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes, and assured him everything was fine, that she just had allergies acting up. He hadn't believed her then, and the concern had only grown stronger since. Before we continue with this incredible story, I need your help to keep bringing you content like this. If you're enjoying this journey, please hit that subscribe button right now. It really makes a difference in helping us reach more people who love real, powerful stories. And here's something super important. Click that hype button. This is crucial because it tells YouTube to show this content to more viewers, and it helps the channel grow tremendously. Also, drop a comment below, even just an emoji, to let me know you're here. Your engagement means everything. Now let's get back to Steve's discovery. The breaking point came on a Friday morning that started like any other. Steve had a light schedule that day, just a few phone meetings in his home office, which meant he would be around the house more than usual. Maria arrived right on time, as always, carrying her small worn backpack and a plastic grocery bag that she always brought with her. She greeted him with her usual quiet, "Good morning, Mr. Harvey," and immediately set to work in the upstairs bedrooms. Steve settled into his office, trying to focus on contract negotiations for his next television project, but his mind kept wandering to the woman working somewhere above him. Something in his gut, that same instinct that had guided him through decades of reading people on stage and screen, told him that Maria needed help, even if she would never ask for it. Around 10:30, Steve heard the familiar sound of the vacuum cleaner stop abruptly, followed by Maria's footsteps hurrying down the stairs faster than normal. Through his office window, he saw her rush to her old Honda Civic, parked in the staff area, near the service entrance, her phone pressed to her ear and her face twisted in visible distress. She sat in the driver's seat with the door open, one foot still on the pavement, having what looked like an intense conversation. Even from a distance, Steve could see her wiping tears from her face, her free hand gesturing emphatically as she spoke. The call lasted about 10 minutes, and when it ended, Maria sat there for another 5 minutes with her head resting on the steering wheel, her whole body seeming to collapse inward. When she finally came back inside, her eyes were red and puffy, despite obvious attempts to wash her face. She apologized profusely for the interruption, something she had never done before, even for normal breaks, and tried to resume her work with the same efficiency as always. But Steve noticed her hands were shaking as she sprayed cleaning solution on the kitchen counters, and twice she had to stop and steady herself against the counter, taking deep breaths like someone trying not to fall apart. This wasn't just a bad day. This was someone carrying a weight that was crushing them, and Steve Harvey, who had built his entire career on connecting with people and understanding human struggle, couldn't ignore it anymore. He made a decision in that moment that would change both of their lives. Instead of respecting the professional boundary that kept employers and employees in their separate worlds, instead of assuming that her problems were none of his business, Steve decided to do something that went against every rule in the handbook for wealthy employers. He decided to follow her. Not in a creepy or invasive way, but because every instinct he had developed over years of interviewing people, of hearing their stories, of seeing behind the masks people wore, told him that Maria was in serious trouble and too proud or too scared to ask for help. He didn't know what he would find, but he knew he couldn't live with himself if he did nothing. That afternoon, when Maria finished her work and left at her usual time of 3 o'clock, Steve waited exactly 2 minutes before getting into one of his more inconspicuous vehicles, a black SUV with tinted windows that wouldn't draw attention. His heart was pounding as he pulled out of his driveway and spotted her old Civic 3 cars ahead at the traffic light. He had no plan, no idea what he was doing, just a deep conviction that this woman who had quietly taken care of his home for 3 years needed someone to take care of her for once. The Atlanta traffic was moderate, and he kept a safe distance, following her through neighborhoods that gradually shifted from the manicured lawns and gated communities of Buckhead to areas where the houses got smaller, the streets got narrower, and the American dream looked a lot more fragile. Maria drove for about 25 minutes, heading southeast toward College Park, an area Steve knew had been struggling economically for years. The contrast to his neighborhood was stark. Here, chain-link fences replaced ornate iron gates, corner stores with barred windows replaced boutique shops, and the people walking the streets looked tired in a way that came from working multiple jobs just to survive. Maria's car finally pulled into the parking lot of a rundown apartment complex called Pinewood Gardens, though there was nothing garden-like about it. The building was a 3-story structure with peeling paint, rusty railings, and air conditioning units hanging precariously from windows. Several units had sheets instead of curtains, and the playground in the central courtyard had broken equipment that looked like it hadn't been maintained in years. Steve parked across the street, far enough to not be obvious, but close enough to see Maria get out of her car, grab her backpack and that grocery bag she always carried, and walk with heavy steps toward a ground-floor unit at the far end of the building. She paused at the door, her hand on the knob, and took several deep breaths before going inside, like someone preparing to face something difficult. Steve sat in his SUV, the engine running, the air conditioning keeping him comfortable while he watched that closed door, and wondered what kind of heartbreak was waiting behind it. He had followed her this far. Now he had to decide. Did he knock on that door and risk overstepping completely? Or did he drive away and pretend he had never seen where his housekeeper really lived, what her life really looked like when she left his mansion every week? The sun was starting to lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the parking lot. A group of teenagers walked by, their laughter echoing off the concrete. An elderly man sat on a folding chair outside his unit, smoking a cigarette and watching the world with tired eyes. This was real America, the America that existed far from television studios and red carpets, the America where people worked themselves to exhaustion and still couldn't get ahead. Steve Harvey had come from this world. He had lived in his car when he was starting out in comedy, had known hunger and uncertainty, and the fear of not being able to provide. Success had taken him far from those days, but it hadn't made him forget. And sitting there watching that closed door, he felt something shift inside him, a reminder of why he had always tried to use his platform to help people, to give back, to remember where he came from. Steve turned off the engine and sat in silence for a moment, gathering his thoughts and his courage. What he was about to do could be seen as intrusive, inappropriate even, but something deeper than social convention was driving him forward. He had learned over the years to trust his instincts about people, and every instinct was screaming that Maria needed help. He stepped out of the SUV, the late afternoon heat hitting him immediately, a stark contrast to the climate-controlled comfort he had just left. The asphalt was cracked and uneven beneath his feet, and he could smell a mixture of fried food, car exhaust, and something vaguely chemical coming from a nearby dumpster that was overflowing with garbage bags. As he walked across the parking lot toward Maria's unit, he noticed details that painted a picture of struggle. A woman hanging laundry on a makeshift line strung between two posts, children's toys scattered in patches of dirt where grass had given up trying to grow, a notice taped to one door warning about overdue rent. This was a community living on the edge, where one unexpected expense, one missed paycheck, one medical emergency could mean the difference between keeping a roof overhead and losing everything. Steve had donated millions to various causes over the years, had helped countless people through his foundation and his show, but there was something different about standing here in person, about seeing poverty not as a statistic, but as the daily reality of someone he actually knew. He reached Maria's door, number 112, and hesitated with his hand raised to knock. Through the thin walls he could hear voices inside, one of them definitely Maria's, speaking in Spanish with that same worried tone he had heard during her phone calls. There was another voice too, younger and weaker, responding in short phrases that were interrupted by coughing. The coughing was harsh and wet, the kind that made Steve wince in sympathy even from outside. He knocked gently, 3 soft raps that somehow felt too loud in the quiet courtyard. The voices inside stopped immediately, followed by footsteps approaching the door with obvious caution. When the door opened just a crack, Maria's face appeared in the gap, and Steve watched as recognition, shock, and then pure terror flashed across her features in rapid succession. Her eyes went wide, her hand flew to her mouth, and she actually took a step backward, as if she had seen a ghost. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Steve could see past her into the small apartment, a cramped living space with furniture that looked like it had been salvaged from thrift stores, a kitchenette with a hot plate instead of a proper stove, and religious pictures covering walls that desperately needed paint. But what caught his attention most was the hospital bed, visible through a doorway to what must have been the bedroom. And in that bed, a young girl who couldn't have been more than 14 or 15, her skin pale against the pillows, an oxygen tube running to her nose from a concentrator humming in the corner. Maria found her voice first, and it came out as a panicked whisper. "Mr. Harvey, I don't understand. Why are you here? How did you—" She trailed off, her hands twisting together nervously, her eyes darting between Steve and the interior of her apartment, as if trying to hide what was already visible. The professional mask she always wore at his house was completely gone now, replaced by raw vulnerability and fear. Steve could see she was terrified, probably thinking she was about to lose her job, that he had followed her because he suspected her of something, that this intrusion would somehow make her already difficult life even harder. Steve raised his hands in a peaceful gesture, trying to project calm and reassurance. "Maria, please, I'm not here to cause problems. I'm here because I'm worried about you. I've noticed you've been upset lately, and today when I saw how distressed you were after that phone call, I needed to make sure you were okay. I know this probably seems strange, and I apologize for showing up unannounced, but I couldn't just ignore what I've been seeing." His voice was gentle, the same tone he used on his show when talking to guests who were sharing painful stories, a tone that invited trust rather than demanded it. Maria's eyes filled with tears, and her shoulders sagged as if the weight she had been carrying alone was finally too much to bear. She looked back toward the bedroom where the girl was, then back at Steve, and he could see the exact moment when her defenses crumbled. "Please don't fire me, Mr. Harvey," she said, her voice breaking. "I need this job. I can't lose this job. I know I haven't been myself lately, but I promise I'll do better. I'll work harder." I won't let my personal problems affect my work anymore, please. The desperation in her voice was heartbreaking, the plea of someone who had been pushed to the absolute limit and was terrified of falling over the edge. Steve felt his own eyes stinging with emotion. Maria, I'm not here to fire you, I'm here to help. Please, can I come in? Can we talk? He gestured toward the apartment, and after a long moment of hesitation, Maria nodded and opened the door wider, stepping aside to let him enter. The apartment was even smaller than it had looked from outside, maybe 500 square feet total, with the living room, kitchen, and dining area all sharing one cramped space. But despite the poverty evident in every corner, the place was immaculately clean, organized with the same attention to detail Maria brought to his mansion. There were fresh flowers in a recycled jar on the small table, the dishes were neatly stacked in a drying rack, and the floor was spotless. She took pride in her space even when that space was barely enough to survive in. From the bedroom, a weak voice called out in Spanish, and Maria responded quickly, her tone shifting to something softer and more soothing. She turned to Steve with an apologetic expression. "That's my daughter, Isabella. She's asking who's here. I told her it's my employer, that everything is fine." She paused, wringing her hands again. "Mr. Harvey, my daughter is very sick. She has cystic fibrosis. It's a genetic disease that affects her lungs and digestive system. She needs constant care, medications, treatments, and eventually she'll need a lung transplant. That's why I work so hard, why I can never miss a day, why I take every extra job I can find. The medical bills are—" She stopped, unable to continue, tears streaming down her face now without any attempt to hide them. Steve felt like someone had punched him in the chest. Cystic fibrosis. He knew enough about it to understand this was serious, life-threatening, and incredibly expensive to treat. He looked toward the bedroom and could see the girl more clearly now. She was propped up on pillows, her thin frame barely making an impression under the blankets, her dark hair spread around her face, and even from this distance, he could see the effort it took for her to breathe. She was watching them with curious eyes that were too old for her young face, eyes that had seen too much suffering, too many hospital rooms, too many worried conversations between adults who thought she wasn't listening. Maria followed his gaze and wiped her face with the back of her hand. "She was diagnosed when she was 3 years old. My husband, he left us 2 years after that. He said he couldn't handle it, couldn't watch his daughter suffer, couldn't deal with the financial pressure. So it's just been the two of us ever since. I work 3 jobs, cleaning your house and 2 other homes during the week, and on weekends I work at a laundromat folding clothes. Isabella is homeschooled because she misses too much regular school with hospital stays and treatments. We don't have family here. We came from Mexico 12 years ago legally, with work visas, but my family is still back in Guadalajara, and they can't help financially. They're struggling themselves." She walked to the small kitchen area and leaned against the counter as if she needed the support to stay standing. "The insurance I have through the agency that hired me, it covers some things, but not everything. Not the specialized medications, not all the hospital stays, not the equipment she needs at home. I'm drowning in medical debt, Mr. Harvey. I owe over $200,000 to various hospitals and doctors. They call me every day, threatening to send collectors to sue me. I've been trying to save for the transplant she'll eventually need, but I can barely keep up with the current bills. Every month I have to choose between paying rent or buying her medications, between keeping the electricity on or paying for her physical therapy sessions." Steve listened in stunned silence, his mind racing to process everything she was telling him. $200,000 in debt, 3 jobs, a daughter who needed a lung transplant. And through all of this, Maria had shown up at his house twice a week for 3 years, always on time, always professional, never once asking for help or even hinting at the nightmare she was living. The strength that required, the dignity, the sheer determination to keep going when most people would have collapsed under that weight. It was staggering. He thought about his own life, about the problems that had seemed so important that morning, contract negotiations and television ratings and which car to drive, and felt a wave of shame at how disconnected he had become from real struggle. Maria continued, her words coming faster now, as if a dam had broken, and everything she had been holding inside for years was finally pouring out. "Last week, Isabella had a severe infection. She was in the hospital for 4 days. That's why I was so upset today. The hospital called to say they won't treat her anymore unless I pay at least $10,000 toward the outstanding balance. $10,000. I don't have $10,000. I don't have $1,000. I have $342 in my bank account right now, and rent is due in 5 days. I've been trying to figure out what to do, where to go, who to ask. I've applied for every assistance program, every charity, every grant I can find. Some help a little, but it's never enough. It's never enough. She turned to face him fully, and Steve saw in her expression something he recognized from his own past. The look of someone who had fought with everything they had and was running out of fight. I'm terrified, Mr. Harvey. I'm terrified that I'm going to lose my daughter because I can't afford to save her. I'm terrified that all my work, all my sacrifice, all the hours I spend away from her so I can earn money to keep her alive, that it's all going to be for nothing. And the worst part is that Isabella knows. She's 15 years old, and she knows that her mother is killing herself trying to keep her alive, and she feels guilty about it. She apologized to me last night for being sick, for costing so much money, for being a burden. My baby apologized for having a disease she didn't choose, and I didn't know what to say to make it better. The apartment fell silent, except for the steady hum of the oxygen concentrator and the distant sounds of the neighborhood outside. Steve stood there, this man who had interviewed presidents and celebrities, who had made millions of people laugh, who had built an empire from nothing, and felt completely inadequate to respond to what he had just heard. But he also felt something else rising inside him, something powerful and clear, purpose. This was why success had found him. This was why he had been given a platform and resources, not just to entertain, not just to accumulate wealth, but to be in a position to help when he encountered suffering that he had the power to address. He walked over to where Maria stood and, without asking permission, pulled her into a hug. She stiffened at first, shocked by the gesture, but then collapsed against him, sobbing into his shoulder with the kind of crying that came from somewhere deep and desperate. Steve held her, this strong woman who had been holding everything together alone for so long, and let her cry. "It's going to be okay," he said quietly. "I promise you, Maria, it's going to be okay. You're not alone anymore. Do you hear me? You're not alone." After several minutes, Maria pulled back from the embrace, wiping her face with trembling hands and looking embarrassed by her breakdown. "I'm sorry, Mr. Harvey. I shouldn't have. This is so unprofessional. You came here and I just dumped all of this on you. I'm so sorry." She moved toward the small bathroom, probably to compose herself, but Steve gently caught her arm. "Stop apologizing," he said firmly, but kindly. "You have nothing to be sorry for. Nothing. What you're dealing with, what you've been carrying alone, that's not something anyone should have to face by themselves. Now I want to meet Isabella, if that's okay with you. And then we're going to sit down and figure out how to fix this situation." His tone left no room for argument, and Maria nodded slowly, still looking uncertain about whether this was really happening or some kind of dream she would wake up from. They walked together to the small bedroom, and as they entered, Isabella turned her head toward them with effort. Up close, Steve could see the toll the disease had taken on her young body. She was painfully thin, her cheekbones prominent, her skin almost translucent. The oxygen tube ran across her face, and there were medication bottles covering every surface of the small nightstand beside her bed. But her eyes were bright and intelligent, and when she saw Steve Harvey standing in her bedroom, those eyes went wide with recognition and disbelief. "Mom," she whispered in accented English, her voice raspy from the effort of speaking. "Is that really Steve Harvey? Like the actual Steve Harvey from Family Feud?" Despite her obvious illness, there was a spark of excitement in her expression, the kind of reaction that reminded Steve she was still just a teenager underneath all the medical trauma. Maria smiled through her tears and nodded, moving to sit on the edge of the bed and take her daughter's hand. Steve approached the bed and pulled up the single chair in the room, sitting down so he was at eye level with Isabella. "Yes, it's really me, and I have to say, your mum has told me a lot about you, and I'm honored to meet you, young lady. How are you feeling today?" He kept his voice warm and conversational, the same way he talked to guests on his show, making it feel like a normal interaction rather than a visit motivated by pity. Isabella glanced at her mother with a questioning look, clearly confused about why Steve Harvey would know anything about her, but she answered politely. I'm okay. Tired, mostly. I had a rough week, but I'm better now than I was. She paused to take a few breaths, the oxygen concentrator working steadily. I watch your show all the time. Well, when I'm feeling good enough. You make me laugh, even when I don't feel like laughing. Mom and we watch Family Feud together when she gets home from work. It's kind of our thing. Steve felt his throat tighten with emotion. Here was this girl fighting for every breath, dealing with pain and fear that no teenager should have to experience, and she was worried about being polite to a stranger in her bedroom. Well, I'm glad we can bring you some joy. Laughter is important medicine, you know. Not the only medicine you need, obviously, but it helps. He looked around the small room, noticing the drawings taped to the walls, clearly Isabella's artwork, depicting flowers and landscapes and dreams of places she probably wondered if she would ever be healthy enough to visit. You're an artist, Steve observed, gesturing to the drawings. Isabella's pale face flushed slightly with pride. I like to draw when I'm stuck in bed. It helps me imagine being other places, doing things that normal kids do. I draw a lot of beaches because I've never seen the ocean. Mum says maybe someday when I'm stronger, we'll take a trip, but I know that's probably not realistic. The ocean is far away and travel is expensive, and I need to be near my doctors. She said it matter-of-factly, without self-pity, just stating the limitations of her reality. Steve looked at Maria, who was crying silently again, and then back at Isabella. What if I told you that things are about to change? What if I told you that you're going to get the treatment you need, that your mom isn't going to have to work herself to exhaustion anymore, and that, yes, you're absolutely going to see the ocean someday soon? Isabella's expression shifted from polite interest to confusion, and she looked at her mother for explanation. Maria shook her head slightly, not wanting her daughter to get false hope. Mr. Harvey, you don't have to say things like that. You've already been so kind just by listening, by caring enough to come here. We'll figure something out. We always do. But her voice lacked conviction, the voice of someone who had been telling themselves they would figure it out for so long that the words had lost their meaning. Steve leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, and looked directly at both of them. I'm not just saying things to make you feel better. I mean every word. Maria, you've been taking care of my home for 3 years. You've been reliable, trustworthy, and excellent at your job. But more than that, you've been doing all of that while carrying this enormous burden, and you never once used it as an excuse, never asked for special treatment, never let it affect the quality of your work. That kind of character, that kind of strength, that deserves to be recognized and supported. And Isabella, you're a fighter. I can see that. You've got spirit and courage that most adults don't have. So here's what's going to happen. He pulled out his phone and started making notes as he spoke. First thing tomorrow morning, I'm going to have my assistant contact the hospital and settle your outstanding medical bills. All of them, every single dollar you owe, it's going to be paid in full. Second, we're going to get you connected with the best cystic fibrosis specialists in the country. I have connections at medical centers that specialize in this disease, places that are doing cutting-edge research and treatments. We're going to make sure Isabella gets on the transplant list at the best facilities, and that when the time comes, every expense is covered. Maria started to protest, her hand over her mouth, shaking her head in disbelief. Mr. Harvey, no, that's too much. I can't accept that. It's hundreds of thousands of dollars. I can't let you do that. But Steve held up his hand to stop her. You're not letting me do anything. I'm choosing to do this because I can, and because it's the right thing to do. Maria, I've been blessed beyond measure in my life. I've been given success and resources that go way beyond what I need for myself and my family. And I truly believe, that those blessings come with responsibility. When you have the ability to change someone's life for the better, and you don't do it, that's not humility or respecting boundaries. That's just being selfish. So please, let me do this. Let me help your family. Isabella was crying now too, tears streaming down her thin face, her breathing becoming more labored with the emotion. Maria moved to comfort her, adjusting her pillows and reminding her to take slow, steady breaths. Steve watched them together, this mother and daughter who had been fighting alone for so long, and felt absolutely certain that he was exactly where he was supposed to be, doing exactly what he was supposed to do. There's more, Steve continued, once Isabella's breathing had stabilized. Maria, I don't want you working 3 jobs anymore. That ends today. You'll continue working for me, but I'm increasing your salary significantly, enough that you can quit the other jobs and actually spend time with your daughter. She needs you here, not exhausting yourself at a laundromat on weekends. And this apartment, this is not acceptable. I'm going to help you find a better place, somewhere cleaner and safer, closer to good medical facilities, with enough space for both of you to live with dignity. Maria was shaking her head in disbelief, unable to process what she was hearing. This can't be real. Things like this don't happen to people like me. I must be dreaming. I'm going to wake up and still owe $200,000 and have no idea how to pay next month's rent. She looked at Steve with desperate hope mixed with fear, as if accepting his help might somehow make it disappear. Steve reached out and took her hand, grounding her in the reality of the moment. This is real, Maria. This is happening. And I need you to understand something important. You deserve this help. You're not a charity case. You're a hard-working mother who has been doing everything humanly possible to take care of her child. The only difference between you and people who don't struggle like this is circumstances and luck, not worth or character. You have more character than most wealthy people I know. So please, accept this help with dignity, knowing that you've earned it through your strength and perseverance. Isabella spoke up then, her voice weak but filled with emotion. Mr. Harvey, why are you doing this for us? You don't even know us. We're nobody special. The question was innocent but profound. The question of someone who had been taught by life that help doesn't come without strings attached. That kindness from strangers is rare and usually conditional. Steve turned to her with a gentle smile. You want to know why? Because a long time ago when I was struggling, when I was sleeping in my car and didn't know where my next meal was coming from, people helped me. Not because I deserved it or earned it, but because they saw someone who needed help and they had the ability to give it. One man gave me $50 when I was completely broke, and I never forgot that. Another person gave me a chance to perform when no one else would. Those small acts of kindness, they changed the trajectory of my entire life. And I promised myself that if I ever made it, if I ever had resources and success, I would pay that forward. I would be the person who helps others the way I was helped. He paused, looking between Maria and Isabella. But it's more than that. It's about recognizing that we're all connected, that your suffering matters just as much as anyone else's, that a mother working 3 jobs to save her daughter's life is a story that deserves a different ending than the one you are heading toward. I have the power to change that ending, and so I'm going to. It's really that simple. No strings attached, no expectations beyond you accepting the help and using it to build a better life for you and Isabella. The room fell quiet again, but this time the silence was different. It wasn't the heavy silence of despair and exhaustion that had filled the apartment when Steve first arrived. It was the silence of hope beginning to take root, of impossible dreams suddenly becoming possible, of a future that had looked dark and uncertain now showing the first rays of light. Maria pulled Isabella close, both of them crying and holding each other, and Steve sat there witnessing their relief and gratitude, feeling more fulfilled than he had felt in years. After a few minutes, Steve stood up and pulled out his wallet. He took out several $100 bills and placed them on the nightstand. This is for immediate needs. Groceries, medications, whatever you need right now while we get everything else organized. Tomorrow my assistant will call you to start coordinating everything, paying off the medical bills, connecting you with specialists, finding you a new place to live. I'll also have my lawyer draw up a new employment contract with your increased salary and benefits, including full health insurance that will cover Isabella's treatments completely. Maria tried to refuse the cash, but Steve was insistent. Please, Maria, let this be easy. You've been fighting hard for so long. Let someone else carry the weight for a while. Finally, she nodded and accepted it, her hands shaking as she held the money that represented more financial breathing room than she had experienced in years. As Steve prepared to leave, Isabella called out to him weakly, "Mr. Harvey, can I ask you something?" He turned back to her and she continued, "When I get better, when I get my transplant and I'm healthy again, can I come visit you? Can I see where my mom works and maybe watch you film your show?" Her eyes were bright with hope and excitement, the eyes of a teenager imagining a future she had almost stopped believing in. Steve walked back to her bedside and took her thin hand gently in his. "Isabella, that's not a question of if, it's a question of when. When you get better, and you will get better, you're absolutely coming to visit. You'll see the studio, meet the crew, maybe even be in the audience for a taping. And we're going to take that trip to the ocean too. That's a promise. You keep fighting, keep being strong, and I'll make sure you have every resource you need to win this battle. Deal?" Isabella nodded, smiling through her tears. Deal. The next morning, Steve Harvey woke up with a sense of purpose that had been missing from his routine for longer than he cared to admit. Before his feet even hit the floor, he was already mentally organizing the day ahead, prioritizing Maria and Isabella's situation above everything else on his schedule. He reached for his phone on the nightstand and immediately called his personal assistant, Jennifer, who had been with him for over a decade and knew how to make things happen quickly and efficiently. "Jennifer, I need you to clear my morning schedule. Everything. Push the conference call with the network to this afternoon and reschedule the lunch meeting for next week. I have something urgent that needs my full attention." His tone was firm but energized, and Jennifer, who had heard every variation of Steve's voice over the years, recognized immediately that this was important. "Of course, Steve. What do you need?" she asked, already pulling up his calendar on her computer. Steve spent the next 15 minutes explaining the situation with Maria and Isabella, providing details about the medical debt, the hospital that was refusing further treatment, and his commitment to resolving everything. Jennifer listened without interruption, taking notes rapidly, and when he finished, she didn't hesitate. "I'll handle it. Give me the hospital name, Maria's full legal name, and her contact information. I'll have our financial team start processing payments immediately, and I'll personally call the hospital administrator to ensure Isabella can resume treatment without any delays. I'll also reach out to our contacts at Emory University Hospital and the Cleveland Clinic. Both have excellent cystic fibrosis programs. We'll get Isabella evaluated by the best specialists in the country." Jennifer's efficiency was one of the reasons Steve trusted her completely. She didn't waste time with questions about whether this was appropriate or affordable. She simply executed. By 10 o'clock that morning, Jennifer had already made significant progress. She called Steve back with an update. "The hospital has confirmed Maria's outstanding balance is $217,462. Our accounting team is processing a wire transfer as we speak, and it should clear by end of business today. I spoke directly with the hospital's chief financial officer and the head of their pulmonary department. Once the payment clears, Isabella will be immediately reinstated as a patient with full access to all necessary treatments. They're also expediting a consultation with their transplant coordinator." Steve felt a wave of satisfaction wash over him. "That's excellent, Jennifer. What about the specialist consultations?" She continued without missing a beat. "I have calls scheduled with the cystic fibrosis centers at both Emory and Cleveland Clinic for this afternoon. I'll need Maria's permission to share Isabella's medical records, but once we have that, we can get her case reviewed by their teams within the week. I'm also looking into experimental treatment programs and clinical trials that Isabella might qualify for. There's some promising research happening right now that could improve her quality of life significantly while she waits for a transplant." Steve closed his eyes and took a deep breath, feeling grateful for the resources and connections that made this kind of rapid intervention possible. "You're amazing, Jennifer. Thank you. Now about housing. Maria and Isabella are living in a terrible apartment in College Park. I want to find them something better, somewhere safe and clean, preferably close to Emory, since that's likely where Isabella will be receiving most of her care. 2 bedrooms, good neighborhood, accessible for someone with medical equipment. Can you work with a realtor to identify some options?" Jennifer was already typing. "Absolutely. I'll reach out to the realtor we used for your investment properties. She knows the Atlanta area well and can find something appropriate. What's the budget?" Steve didn't hesitate. "Whatever it takes to get them somewhere decent. I'll cover the rent for the first year while Maria adjusts to her new salary structure. Speaking of which, I want to triple her current pay and add comprehensive health insurance that covers pre-existing conditions with no caps on benefits. Work with HR to draw up a new contract." There was a brief pause on the line, and Steve could almost hear Jennifer smiling. "Steve, this is a really good thing you're doing. I've worked for a lot of wealthy people, and most of them wouldn't notice their housekeeper was struggling, let alone do something about it on this scale. Maria and Isabella are lucky you're the kind of person who pays attention and cares." Her words touched him more than he expected. "I'm the lucky one, Jennifer. I get to be in a position to actually make a difference. That's a privilege, not a burden." While Jennifer worked on the logistics, Steve decided to visit Maria and Isabella again, this time with some immediate good news. He called Maria first to let her know he was coming, not wanting to show up unannounced again. When she answered, her voice was thick with emotion, and he could tell she had been crying, probably overwhelmed by everything that had happened the previous day and uncertain whether it had all been real. "Mr. Harvey, I've been sitting here trying to figure out if yesterday actually happened or if I imagined it. I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and everything will be back to the way it was." Her voice cracked, and Steve could hear the exhaustion and disbelief that came from years of disappointment, teaching her not to hope too much. "It was real, Maria, and it's still happening. In fact, I'm calling because I have updates, and I'd like to come by and share them with you and Isabella in person. Would that be okay? I can be there in about 30 minutes. Maria agreed immediately, and Steve could hear her calling to Isabella in the background, telling her to get ready for a visitor, her voice lifting with cautious excitement. When Steve arrived at the Pinewood Gardens apartment complex for the second time, it looked different to him in the morning light. Yesterday it had seemed depressing and hopeless, but today, knowing that Maria and Isabella wouldn't be living here much longer, it just looked like a temporary situation rather than a permanent trap. He knocked on the door, and Maria opened it almost immediately, as if she had been waiting right there. She had clearly made an effort to look presentable, her hair neatly pulled back, wearing clean clothes, but her eyes were still red and swollen from crying. "Please come in, Mr. Harvey. Isabella is awake and feeling a bit better today. She's been talking about your visit non-stop since you left yesterday. I think having something to hope for has already made a difference in her spirit." Maria led him inside, and Steve noticed she had cleaned the already spotless apartment even more thoroughly, probably nervous about him seeing it in daylight. Fresh flowers sat in the jar on the table, and she had clearly been cooking something that smelled delicious, probably trying to offer hospitality despite having so little. Isabella was propped up in bed, looking slightly more alert than the previous day, her oxygen tube in place but her color a bit better. When Steve entered the room, her face lit up with a genuine smile. "Mr. Harvey, Mom said you were coming back. I was afraid maybe yesterday was a dream, that maybe I had imagined you being here because I was having a bad day and my mind was playing tricks on me." Her honesty was disarming, and Steve understood completely. When you've lived with disappointment long enough, hope becomes dangerous. Steve sat down in the same chair as yesterday and pulled out his phone, opening his notes. "Well, I'm very real, and so is everything I promised you. In fact, I have some updates that I think you're both going to want to hear. First, and most importantly, Isabella, your medical bills are being paid today. All of them. By the end of business today, you will owe exactly $0 to the hospital, and they've already confirmed that you can resume treatment immediately. Your doctors are expecting you for a follow-up appointment tomorrow morning." Maria gasped and covered her mouth with both hands, her eyes filling with tears instantly. Isabella stared at Steve in shock, her thin chest rising and falling rapidly as the news sank in. "All of it? The whole $200,000? That's really happening today?" Her voice was barely a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might shatter the miracle. "Every single penny," Steve confirmed, "and that's just the beginning. My assistant has been in contact with two of the best cystic fibrosis treatment centers in the country, Emory University Hospital right here in Atlanta and the Cleveland Clinic in Ohio. Both programs want to review your case and evaluate you for their transplant programs. These are facilities that specialize in exactly what you're dealing with doctors who have dedicated their entire careers to helping patients like you. We're going to make sure you have access to the absolute best care available." Isabella started crying, not the sad, hopeless crying Steve had witnessed yesterday, but tears of relief and joy and disbelief that her nightmare might actually be ending. Maria moved to her daughter's side, holding her carefully, both of them shaking with emotion. Steve gave them a moment, understanding that they needed to process this together, that years of fear and struggle were being released in those tears. After a few minutes, Maria looked up at Steve with an expression of profound gratitude. "Mr. Harvey, I don't have words for what this means. You've given us our lives back. You've given Isabella a future. How do I ever thank you for something like this? How do I ever repay this kind of kindness?" Her voice was thick with emotion, and Steve could see she was struggling with the magnitude of what was happening. Steve leaned forward, his expression serious but warm. "Maria, you don't repay it. That's not how this works. You accept it with grace, you use it to build a better life for you and Isabella, and someday, when you're in a position to help someone else who's struggling, you pay it forward. That's the only repayment I want or need. The knowledge that this kindness will ripple outward, that maybe Isabella will grow up and help someone else because she remembers what it felt like to be helped when she needed it most. That's how we change the world, one act of compassion at a time." He pulled up some photos on his phone that Jennifer had sent him. "Now let's talk about your living situation. I've had my realtor looking at apartments and small houses in better neighborhoods, places that are close to Emory Hospital, and in safe areas with good schools for when Isabella is healthy enough to attend in person. I want you both to look at these options and tell me which ones you like. We're going to get you out of this place and into somewhere you can actually thrive, not just survive." Steve showed them photos of several properties. A 2-bedroom apartment in a modern complex with a pool and fitness center, a small townhouse in a quiet neighborhood with a yard, and a ground floor unit in a building specifically designed for accessibility with medical equipment. Each option was light years beyond the cramped, run-down apartment they currently occupied. Maria and Isabella looked at the photos with wide eyes, pointing out features they liked, discussing which location would be most convenient, their voices animated with excitement that had been absent from their lives for so long. "This one," Isabella said, pointing to the townhouse. "It has a yard. I've always wanted a yard where I could sit outside and draw when the weather is nice. And look, there's a window in the bedroom that gets lots of natural light. Mom, can you imagine having a kitchen with an actual stove instead of just a hot plate?" Her enthusiasm was infectious, and even Maria, who was clearly still struggling to believe this was real, allowed herself to smile and imagine a better life. Steve made a note of their preference. "The townhouse it is. I'll have Jennifer coordinate with the realtor to start the application process. You should be able to move in within 2 weeks, maybe sooner, if we can expedite things. And Maria, about your employment. I'm having a new contract drawn up that triples your current salary and includes comprehensive health insurance for both of you. The insurance will cover all of Isabella's treatments, medications, and eventually her transplant, with no lifetime caps or exclusions for pre-existing conditions. You won't have to work multiple jobs anymore. You can focus on being Isabella's mum and actually having time to spend with her." Maria shook her head in disbelief, tears streaming down her face again. "Triple my salary? Mr. Harvey, that's too much. I don't need that much. I just need enough to take care of Isabella and pay our bills. You're already doing so much." But Steve was firm in his response. "Maria, you've been working 3 jobs and barely surviving. That ends now. You deserve to live, not just survive. You deserve to have savings in the bank, to not panic when an unexpected expense comes up, to be able to take Isabella out for a nice dinner sometimes without calculating whether you can afford it. This isn't charity. This is paying you what your work and your character are actually worth. So please accept it and let yourself breathe for the first time in years." Over the following weeks, Steve Harvey watched as Maria and Isabella's lives transformed in ways that even he found deeply moving. The hospital payments cleared exactly as promised, and Isabella was immediately scheduled for comprehensive evaluations with the pulmonary team at Emory University Hospital. The specialists there were impressed with how well she had managed her condition despite limited resources, and they immediately implemented an aggressive treatment plan that included newer medications, advanced respiratory therapies, and nutritional support that began improving her strength almost immediately. The move to the townhouse happened faster than expected. Jennifer had worked her magic with the realtor and the property management company, and within 10 days, Maria and Isabella were packing up their belongings from the Pinewood Gardens apartment. Steve had arranged for professional movers to handle everything, and he also sent them to a furniture store with instructions to let Maria and Isabella pick out whatever they needed for their new home. When moving day arrived, Steve showed up personally to help, not because they needed another pair of hands with the professional movers there, but because he wanted to be part of this milestone moment. He arrived at the townhouse before Maria and Isabella, wanting to see their reactions when they walked in for the first time. The place had been professionally cleaned, the utilities were all connected, and Jennifer had arranged for a welcome basket filled with groceries and household essentials to be waiting in the kitchen. When Maria's old Honda Civic pulled up outside, followed by the moving truck, Steve stood on the small front porch and watched as both of them got out of the car and stared at their new home with expressions of wonder. Isabella was using a wheelchair that day, conserving her energy for the move, and Maria pushed her up the accessible ramp that led to the front door. When they reached the porch where Steve was waiting, both of them had tears in their eyes. "Welcome home," Steve said simply, handing Maria the keys. Her hands shook as she took them, and she stood there for a moment, just holding the keys, as if they represented something far more significant than access to a building. "I never thought I would have a home like this," Maria whispered. "I thought we would be stuck in that apartment forever, that the best I could hope for was keeping a roof over our heads. Any roof, no matter how bad the neighborhood or how small the space. And now this beautiful place with a yard and space and safety. Mr. Harvey, you've given us dignity. That's what this is. You've given us the dignity of a real home." They went inside together, and Steve watched as Maria and Isabella explored every room, exclaiming over the full kitchen with modern appliances, the bedrooms with large windows that let in natural light, the bathroom with a walk-in shower that would be easy for Isabella to use, and the small backyard with a patio where Isabella could sit outside. The movers brought in their belongings, which looked sparse in the larger space, but Steve had anticipated that. Within hours, furniture deliveries began arriving. A new bed for Isabella with an adjustable frame for her medical needs, a comfortable couch for the living room, a dining table and chairs, dressers, lamps, kitchen supplies, everything they needed to turn the house into a real home. Isabella sat in her wheelchair in the middle of the living room, watching everything happen around her with an expression of pure joy. "Mom, we have a real house. We have a yard. I can't believe this is really ours." She kept repeating variations of the same sentiment, as if saying it out loud would make it more real. Maria was overwhelmed, moving from room to room, touching the walls, opening cabinets, still unable to fully process the transformation of their circumstances. As the afternoon wore on, and the movers finished their work, Steve helped Maria arrange furniture and put away kitchen supplies. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, and then Maria spoke quietly. "Mr. Harvey, can I tell you something? Last month, I was seriously considering giving up. I was so tired, so overwhelmed, so buried in debt and fear that I didn't see any way forward. I was starting to think that maybe Isabella would be better off without me, that maybe if something happened to me, she could become a ward of the state and get the medical care she needed through government programs. I was thinking about life insurance policies and whether my death would solve more problems than it created." Steve stopped what he was doing and turned to face her, his heart breaking at the confession. Maria continued, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm telling you this because I want you to understand what you did. You didn't just pay some bills and find us a nicer apartment. You saved my life. You saved both of our lives. You gave me a reason to keep fighting, to keep hoping, to believe that good things can still happen to people like us. I will never forget that, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of the kindness you've shown us." Steve walked over to her and placed his hands gently on her shoulders. "Maria, you were already worthy. You've always been worthy. Your circumstances didn't define your worth. They just defined your struggle. And I'm honored that I could be the person who helped change those circumstances. But I need you to promise me something. Promise me that you'll never again think that you or Isabella would be better off without each other. You're a team, and you're both fighters, and now you have the resources to win the fight. Promise me." Maria nodded, tears streaming down her face. I promise I'll never give up again." How could I after everything you've done? I have to live up to this gift to make sure Isabella grows up knowing that kindness exists in the world, that people can be good, that miracles can happen. They stood there for a moment, and then Maria did something she had never done before. She hugged Steve without hesitation, without the professional distance she had always maintained, just a genuine embrace of gratitude and connection. The weeks turned into months, and Steve stayed involved in Maria and Isabella's journey. He visited regularly, sometimes bringing his wife Marjorie to meet them, sometimes just stopping by to check on Isabella's progress and hear about her latest doctor's appointments. The medical team at Emory was working wonders. With access to the best medications and treatments, Isabella's lung function improved significantly. She gained weight, her color improved, and most importantly, her spirits soared. She started attending school remotely with more consistency, making friends online, and even talking about what she wanted to study in college someday, conversations that would have seemed impossibly optimistic just months earlier. One afternoon in early spring, about 4 months after Steve had first followed Maria home, he received a call from her that was different from the usual updates. Her voice was shaking, but this time with excitement rather than fear. "Mr. Harvey, they found a match. The transplant coordinator called this morning. They have lungs for Isabella. We need to get to the hospital immediately. They're prepping her for surgery tonight." Steve's heart leaped. "That's incredible news, Maria. Are you at the hospital now? Do you need anything?" Maria's voice cracked with emotion. "We're on our way there now. The ambulance just picked us up. Mr. Harvey, I'm terrified and excited and grateful all at the same time. This is what we've been waiting for, what we've been fighting for, and it's finally happening. I just wanted you to know, wanted to thank you again, because without you, we wouldn't even be on the transplant list. We wouldn't have made it this far." Steve was already grabbing his car keys. "I'm coming to the hospital right now. You're not going through this alone. I'll be there before Isabella goes into surgery, I promise." He drove to Emory Hospital faster than he probably should have, his mind racing with prayers and hopes for this young girl who had already fought so hard for her life. When he arrived at the surgical wing, he found Maria in the waiting area, outside the pre-op rooms, pacing nervously, her hands clasped together. "She's in there getting prepped," Maria said when she saw Steve. "They're running final tests and getting her ready. The surgery will take about 6 to 8 hours. The doctors say she's a good candidate, that she's strong enough for this, but there are always risks. What if something goes wrong? What if we've come all this way and I lose her anyway?" The fear in her voice was palpable, the fear of a mother who had been given hope and was now terrified of having it taken away. Steve guided her to a chair and sat beside her. "Isabella is a fighter. She's been fighting her whole life, and she's not going to stop now. You have to believe that, Maria. You have to hold on to faith that this surgery is going to work, that she's going to come through it, and finally have the healthy life she deserves. And whatever happens, you're not alone. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere until we know she's okay." A nurse came out and told them Isabella was asking for her mother and for Mr. Harvey. They were allowed into the pre-op room where Isabella lay on a gurney, already in a hospital gown, an IV in her arm, looking small and vulnerable, but also brave. When she saw them, she smiled weakly. "Hey, Mom. Hey, Mr. Harvey, thanks for coming. I'm kind of nervous, not going to lie." Steve approached the gurney and took her hand carefully. "Being nervous is completely normal. You're about to have a major surgery. But you know what? You're also about to get a new chance at life. You're going to wake up with healthy lungs, and you're going to be able to breathe without that oxygen tube, and you're going to be able to run and play and do all the things other teenagers do. And remember what I promised you. When you're recovered, we're taking that trip to the ocean. I haven't forgotten." Isabella's eyes brightened despite her nervousness. "I haven't forgotten either. I've been drawing pictures of what I think the ocean looks like, but I can't wait to see it for real. And Mr. Harvey, I want you to know that you changed my life. Even if something goes wrong today, even if this doesn't work out the way we hope, you still gave me months of happiness and hope that I wouldn't have had otherwise. You gave my mom peace and rest. You gave us a beautiful home. You gave us everything, so thank you for all of it." Steve felt tears stinging his eyes, and he didn't try to hide them. "Nothing is going to go wrong, Isabella. You're going to come through this surgery, and you're going to have an amazing life ahead of you. I believe that with everything in me. So you go in there and you fight like you've been fighting your whole life, and when you wake up, your mom and I will be right here waiting for you. Deal?" Isabella squeezed his hand weakly. "Deal." The surgical team came in then to take Isabella to the operating room. Maria kissed her daughter's forehead, whispering words of love and encouragement, and then they watched as the gurney was wheeled away down the long corridor toward the surgical suites. Maria collapsed into Steve's arms, sobbing with fear and hope and exhaustion, and he held her. This strong woman who had carried so much for so long and was now finally allowing someone else to help carry the weight. The next 8 hours were the longest of Steve Harvey's life, and he had lived through plenty of difficult moments in his 60-plus years. He and Maria sat in the surgical waiting room, joined eventually by Marjorie, who brought food and coffee and quiet support. They talked about everything and nothing, shared stories about Isabella's personality and dreams, prayed together, and waited with the kind of patience that only comes from having no other choice. Other families came and went, receiving news about their loved ones, some good and some devastating, and each time a doctor emerged through those doors, Maria would tense up, waiting to hear if it was their turn. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a surgeon in blue scrubs emerged and called Maria's name. They all stood up immediately, and Steve put his arm around Maria's shoulders as they approached the doctor. The surgeon's face was tired but smiling, and Steve felt relief wash over him before any words were even spoken. "The surgery went very well," the doctor said, and Maria actually gasped with relief. "Isabella came through it beautifully. The new lungs are functioning properly and she's stable. She's in recovery now and she'll be moved to the ICU shortly, where she'll stay for the next several days while we monitor her closely. The next 48 hours are critical, but I'm very optimistic. She's a strong young woman and she fought hard in there. You should be proud of her." Maria was crying and laughing at the same time, thanking the doctor repeatedly, and Steve felt his own tears flowing freely. They had done it. Isabella had made it through. The girl who had been lying in that run-down apartment just months ago, struggling to breathe, drowning in medical debt, with no hope for a transplant, had just received new lungs and a new chance at life. It was nothing short of miraculous. They were allowed to see Isabella briefly in recovery. She was unconscious, intubated, surrounded by monitors and machines, but her chest was rising and falling steadily, and the numbers on the screens showed strong, vital signs. Maria stood beside the bed, holding her daughter's hand, whispering to her even though Isabella couldn't hear. "You did it, baby. You made it through. Now you just need to rest and heal, and when you wake up, everything is going to be different. Everything is going to be better." Steve stood back, giving them their moment, but feeling profoundly grateful to have been part of this journey. This was why success mattered. This was why having resources and influence and connections mattered. Not for the mansions or the cars or the fame, but for moments like this, when you could use what you had been given to literally save a life, to give hope where there had been none, to be the answer to someone's desperate prayers. Isabella's recovery was long and challenging, but she progressed steadily. Within weeks, she was breathing on her own without any assistance for the first time in her life. Within months, she was walking without getting winded, eating without digestive issues, gaining strength and vitality that transformed her from a sick child into a thriving teenager. Steve visited regularly throughout her recovery, bringing gifts and encouragement, celebrating every milestone with Maria and Isabella as if they were his own family. True to his promise, 6 months after the transplant, when Isabella had been cleared by her doctors for travel, Steve arranged a trip to the coast. He rented a beach house in South Carolina for a long weekend and invited Maria and Isabella to join his family. The moment when Isabella first saw the ocean, when she stood on the sand with tears streaming down her face and breathed in the salt air with her new healthy lungs, was one of the most beautiful moments Steve had ever witnessed. She ran into the waves, laughing and splashing, doing things that most teenagers took for granted, but that she had never been able to do before. That evening, as they sat around a bonfire on the beach, Isabella turned to Steve with a serious expression. "Mr. Harvey, I've been thinking about what I want to do with my life, what I want to study in college. I've decided I want to become a doctor, specifically a pulmonologist who works with cystic fibrosis patients. I want to help other kids like me, kids who are scared and sick and don't know if they're going to make it. I want to be able to tell them that I understand because I've been there, and I want to give them the same hope that you gave me." Steve felt his heart swell with pride and emotion. "Isabella, that's a beautiful dream, and I have no doubt you're going to achieve it. You're going to be an incredible doctor, because you'll bring not just knowledge but empathy and personal experience. And when you're ready for college, when you're applying to medical schools, you let me know. I'll make sure finances aren't an obstacle to your dreams. You focus on studying and healing and becoming the person you're meant to be." Maria, sitting beside her daughter with her arm around her shoulders, looked at Steve with an expression of profound gratitude. "You know what the most amazing part of this whole story is? It's not just that you saved Isabella's life, though that would be enough. It's that you saw us. You noticed when I was struggling. You paid attention when most people in your position wouldn't have. You followed your instinct to help, instead of ignoring it because it was inconvenient or uncomfortable. That's the real miracle here, that someone with your resources and influence chose to use them for good, chose to see the humanity in your housekeeper and her sick daughter." Steve looked out at the ocean, watching the waves roll in under the moonlight, and thought about the journey that had brought them all to this moment. "I think we all have opportunities every day to make a difference in someone's life. Most of the time, we're too busy or too distracted or too wrapped up in our own problems to notice. But when we do notice, when we do pay attention to the people around us and the struggles they're facing, we have a choice. We can look away and protect our comfort, or we can step up and do something about it. I'm just grateful I made the right choice that day when I decided to follow you home, Maria. It changed your life and Isabella's life, but honestly, it changed mine too. It reminded me what really matters, what success is really for." As the fire crackled and the ocean whispered its eternal rhythm, the three of them sat together in comfortable silence, bound by a story of struggle and compassion and transformation that none of them would ever forget. Isabella was alive and healthy, dreaming of a future that had once seemed impossible. Maria was at peace, no longer working herself to exhaustion, no longer drowning in debt and fear. And Steve Harvey had been reminded of the most important truth of all, that the greatest privilege of success is the ability to change someone's story, to be the unexpected answer to someone's prayers, to prove that kindness and generosity can still exist in a world that often feels cold and indifferent. The story of how Steve Harvey followed his MAID and discovered a heartbreaking situation that he had the power to change became more than just a personal experience. Steve shared it publicly, not to praise himself, but to challenge others with resources and influence to pay attention to the people in their lives, to notice when someone is struggling, to use their blessings to bless others. The story inspired countless acts of kindness, encouraged employers to see their employees as whole human beings with complex lives and challenges, and reminded everyone that sometimes the most profound impact we can have comes not from grand gestures on a public stage, but from private acts of compassion for the people right in front of us. Years later, when Isabella graduated from medical school and began her residency in pulmonology, Steve Harvey was there in the audience, cheering louder than anyone. When she treated her first cystic fibrosis patient and was able to tell that scared teenager that she understood, because she had been there too, she thought of the man who had saved her life by simply choosing to care. And when Maria retired from housekeeping years later, financially secure and proud of the daughter who had beaten the odds and become a doctor, she never forgot the day that Steve Harvey knocked on her door and changed everything. The lesson of their story echoed far beyond their individual lives, that we are all connected, that suffering matters regardless of who is experiencing it, that those who have been blessed with abundance have a responsibility to share that abundance with those who are struggling, and that sometimes the most important thing we can do is simply pay attention, notice when someone needs help, and have the courage to step up and provide it. In a world that often feels divided and cold, their story was a reminder that compassion, generosity, and human connection can still change everything. Hey, my friends, help me by subscribing to the channel so we can reach 1,000 subscribers, even if you're watching from your TV or computer. Your subscription makes all the difference, and the algorithm will help you see more amazing stories. Leave a like or an emoji in the comments and be part of this growth.